Dad's 70th birthday party was in full swing on the sprawling patio of what everyone assumed was the family estate. 40 relatives and friends gathered around tables laden with barbecue and birthday cake, celebrating while a gentle breeze carried laughter across the manicured gardens. The pool sparkled in the afternoon sun, and the elegant guest house I'd built 3 years ago provided the perfect backdrop for family photos. At 32, I sat quietly at a corner table, still treated as the family's underachiever despite holding a doctorate in environmental engineering. Everyone assumed I worked some government desk job that barely paid the bills, which explained why I lived so modestly and never seemed to have impressive career stories to share at family gatherings. My golden child brother David, 35, held court near the pool, regaling guests with tales from his struggling marketing consultancy. Despite 3 failed business ventures in 5 years, he remained the family favorite, the son with entrepreneurial spirit who just needed the right opportunity to succeed. "Everyone gather around," Dad called out, tapping his beer bottle with a fork. "I want to make an important announcement on this milestone birthday." The crowd assembled eagerly, expecting another heartfelt speech about family and legacy. Dad stood beside a mahogany outdoor table where several manila folders lay waiting. "At 70, I've been thinking about how to help the next generation achieve their dreams," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making family decisions. "David has an incredible business opportunity that just needs proper funding." David beamed beside him, clearly aware of what was coming. His wife Jennifer nodded enthusiastically, having spent years watching other family members succeed while David's ventures struggled. "The pool house sale will fund your brother's business," Dad proclaimed, gesturing toward the elegant structure behind him. "I've decided to sell the guest house to provide David with the capital he needs for his new digital marketing firm." My stomach dropped. The guest house wasn't a family asset. It was my home, built on my property, funded entirely by my environmental consulting firm that specialized in water treatment systems for industrial clients. Aunt Linda clapped her hands together. "Tom, what a wonderful way to support David's entrepreneurial dreams." Uncle Mark raised his beer approvingly. "That guest house must be worth at least $200,000. Perfect seed money for a new business." Dad opened one of the folders with obvious satisfaction. "Actually, the appraisal came in at $275,000. More than enough for David to lease proper office space and hire the staff he needs." I stared at the documents in growing horror. Somehow, Dad had obtained appraisal paperwork for a property that had never belonged to him. "The timing is perfect," David added excitedly. "My business partner is ready to sign the lease on a downtown office suite. We just needed the funding to move forward professionally." A woman in her 50s approached the table, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the confident smile of a successful real estate professional. "Mr. Morrison, everything is ready for the closing process." Dad gestured toward her with obvious pride. "Everyone, this is Barbara Chin from Premier Properties. She's been instrumental in making this sale happen so quickly." Barbara opened her briefcase efficiently. "The buyers are very excited about the property. They're actually here today for a final walkthrough." She pointed toward a well-dressed couple emerging from the guest house with measuring tape and notebooks, clearly conducting a thorough inspection of what they believed they were purchasing. "Barbara handled everything," Dad continued. "Marketing, showings, negotiations, all while keeping it a surprise for David's birthday gift." The family murmured appreciation for Dad's organizational skills and generosity. Jennifer wiped away a tear, overwhelmed by what seemed like finally getting the break David deserved. "The closing is scheduled for Monday morning," Barbara announced. "Cash sale, no financing contingencies. Your son will have his business funding by next week." My phone buzzed with an alert from my property monitoring service. I glanced at the screen and felt a mix of rage and anticipation. "Deed registration alert. Unauthorized transfer attempt detected for 1247 Oakwood Lane, guest residence." Perfect timing. "Dad," I said quietly, standing from my corner table, "you can't sell that property." He barely glanced in my direction. "Sarah, I know change is difficult, but David needs this opportunity. The guest house sits empty most of the time anyway." "It doesn't sit empty," I said calmly. "I live there." The conversation around the table slowed as people began paying attention to the exchange. "Sarah," Mom interjected with patient condescension. You rent a room there occasionally when you're in town. It's not the same as actual residency. I own it, I said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Barbara looked up from her paperwork with confusion, while the buyers in my backyard continued measuring windows obliviously. That's impossible, Dad said with diminishing confidence. The guest house is part of our family property. I built it 15 years ago. You built it on my land, I corrected. With my money. Using my construction permits. Barbara Chen's professional smile faltered as she sensed something going very wrong with her sale. Excuse me, is there some kind of ownership dispute here? There's no dispute, I replied calmly. 1247 Oakwood Lane has been owned by Morrison Environmental Solutions since 2021. I'm the sole proprietor. David stepped forward aggressively. Sarah, this isn't funny. Don't ruin my business opportunity with some ridiculous claim. It's not a claim, I said, pulling out my phone. It's documented with the county deed registry, which just sent me an alert about unauthorized transfer attempts. I showed the screen to Barbara, whose face went completely pale as she read the fraud alert notification. Mr. Morrison, she said carefully, you assured me you had full ownership authority for this property. I do, Dad insisted, though his voice now carried uncertainty. This is family land. The guest house is part of our estate. Actually, I said, the guest house sits on 2.3 acres that I purchased in 2020 when you couldn't afford the property taxes anymore. Aunt Linda looked confused. Sarah, honey, what are you talking about? You work for the government. You can't afford to buy property. I don't work for the government, I replied patiently. I own Morrison Environmental Solutions. We design water treatment systems for industrial clients worldwide. The family stared at me as if I'd announced I was an astronaut. Uncle Mark shook his head dismissively. Sarah, we know you have some little consulting job, but last year's revenue was $3.2 million, I interrupted. I employ 47 people across 6 countries. The guest house is my primary residence and our North American headquarters. Barbara was frantically scrolling through her phone, clearly Googling my company. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror as she found my business profile. Dr. Sarah Morrison, she read aloud, founder and CEO of Morrison Environmental Solutions, specializing in industrial water treatment design and environmental compliance consulting. David grabbed the phone from her hands. That can't be right. Sarah doesn't even have a real career. Dr. Morrison holds patents on 7 water treatment innovations, Barbara continued reading, and serves as a technical advisor to the EPA's Industrial Compliance Division. The birthday party had gone completely silent except for the sound of the buyers still measuring my property in the background. The company website shows projects in 12 countries, Barbara added weakly, with clients including Fortune 500 manufacturers and government agencies. Dad sank into his chair as the reality began penetrating his assumptions. But you live so simply. You drive that old truck. You never talk about work success. Because every time I mention my projects, you assume I'm filing paperwork or attending meetings, I said. Last month when I said I was traveling to Germany for a client consultation, you thought I meant a government training seminar. Jennifer found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. If Sarah owns the property, what happens to David's business funding? There is no business funding, I said simply. You can't sell property you don't own. Barbara was packing her briefcase with obvious panic. Mr. Morrison, attempted sale of property without ownership rights constitutes fraud. I need to contact my legal department immediately. My phone rang with another call. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled grimly. This should be interesting, I said, answering on speaker. Dr. Morrison speaking. Dr. Morrison, this is Detective James Rodriguez from the County Fraud Investigation Unit. We received an automated alert about attempted property fraud involving your residence. Are you available to discuss this matter? The birthday party guests stared in shock as a fraud detective's voice carried across the patio through my phone's speaker. I'm available, Detective Rodriguez. The situation is developing in real time. Excellent. We've been monitoring unusual activity involving your property. Can you confirm that you did not authorize any sale or transfer of 1247 Oakwood Lane? I can confirm that. The attempted sale was arranged without my knowledge or consent. Barbara looked like she might be sick. Mr. Morrison, I need to withdraw from this transaction immediately. My agency cannot be involved in fraudulent property sales. Actually, Detective Rodriguez's voice continued, we'd like Ms. Chin to remain available for questioning. Attempted property fraud involving licensed real estate agents carries additional penalties. Detective Rodriguez arrived within 20 minutes, his unmarked sedan pulling into the driveway as Dad's birthday celebration descended into chaos. He was a serious man in his 40s, carrying a badge and the kind of authority that immediately commanded attention. Dr. Morrison? He called out, approaching the patio where 40 birthday guests now sat in uncomfortable silence. That's me, I replied, walking over to meet him. Detective James Rodriguez, County Fraud Investigation Unit. I understand we have an attempted property fraud situation involving real estate professionals. His voice carried across the patio clearly, ensuring everyone could hear the gravity of the situation. Detective, Dad stood up desperately. There's been a misunderstanding. This is family property. I was just trying to help my son. Detective Rodriguez consulted his tablet. Sir, are you Thomas Morrison, the individual who signed listing agreements for 1247 Oakwood Lane? Yes, but... Mr. Morrison, according to county records, you haven't owned property at that address since 2021. Could you explain how you obtained authority to sell it? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the buyers finally emerging from the guest house, looking confused about why the birthday party had turned into a police investigation. Barbara stepped forward reluctantly. Detective, I'm Barbara Chin from Premier Properties. Mr. Morrison presented himself as the property owner. I had no knowledge of any ownership irregularities. Ms. Chin, Detective Rodriguez replied, real estate license regulations require verification of ownership before listing any property. Did you confirm Mr. Morrison's legal ownership through deed records? Her silence was answer enough. I see. Ms. Chin, attempted sale of property without owner consent, facilitated by a licensed real estate professional, carries penalties including license revocation and potential criminal charges. Barbara's successful real estate career was crumbling in real time. Detective, surely there's some way to resolve this as a family matter. Ma'am, fraud is fraud regardless of family relationships, he replied matter-of-factly. Dr. Morrison, I'll need you to file a formal complaint to proceed with prosecution. All eyes turned to me as I considered my options. Dad looked devastated, David appeared ready to be sick, and Barbara was clearly calculating the destruction of her professional life. Detective, I said carefully, before I decide about prosecution, I'd like to understand exactly how this fraud was orchestrated. He nodded approvingly. Excellent question. Mr. Morrison, how did you obtain the property appraisal and listing documentation? Dad looked around desperately for support that wasn't coming. Barbara said she could handle all the paperwork. I just signed where she told me to. Ms. Chin, Detective Rodriguez continued, did you inform Mr. Morrison that he was signing fraudulent ownership affidavits? I thought, he seemed so confident about owning the property. She stammered weakly. Professional real estate agents are required to verify ownership claims, not assume them, the detective explained. Your license specifically requires due diligence to prevent exactly this type of fraud. The buyers approached hesitantly, clearly confused about the situation. Excuse me, the man said, are we still scheduled to close on Monday? Sir, Detective Rodriguez replied, you're attempting to purchase property from someone who doesn't own it. I'd suggest consulting your attorney immediately. The woman looked between Dad and Barbara with growing alarm. We've already arranged financing. We have earnest money deposited. Ma'am, you'll need to pursue recovery of those funds through civil litigation. This is now a criminal fraud investigation. Barbara's phone was ringing constantly, probably her real estate agency's legal department trying to manage the crisis that was about to destroy her career. Detective Rodriguez, I said, what are the typical penalties for this type of fraud? For unlicensed individuals like Mr. Morrison, fraud charges can result in fines up to $50,000 and potential imprisonment. For licensed professionals like Ms. Chin, the penalties include automatic license revocation, professional sanctions and criminal prosecution. Dad collapsed back into his chair as the full weight of his situation became clear. David's business funding had not only evaporated, Dad now faced criminal charges for trying to steal my property. The birthday party ended with guests making uncomfortable excuses and rapid departures, leaving behind half-eaten cake and the debris of Dad's spectacular miscalculation. Detective Rodriguez spent an hour documenting the fraud attempt while Barbara Chen's real estate career imploded via frantic phone calls with her agency's lawyers. "Dr. Morrison," Detective Rodriguez said as he prepared to leave, "I need your decision about prosecution. Given the scale of this fraud attempt and the professional real estate involvement, the district attorney will likely pursue charges regardless of your preference." I looked at Dad, who sat in his birthday chair looking decades older than he had 3 hours earlier. "Detective, I'd like to file the complaint. This behavior needs consequences." Dad's face crumpled, but he nodded acceptance. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I had no idea you'd built such a successful business." "You had no idea because you never asked," I replied. "For 3 years, Dad. 3 years of dismissing my environmental engineering work as government paperwork, while I built a multi-million-dollar consulting firm. Barbara's agency fired her that evening. The state real estate board launched an investigation that resulted in permanent license revocation. Her career as a real estate professional was finished. The buyers lost their earnest money and had to start their home search over, having learned the hard way to verify property ownership independently. David's business opportunity collapsed without funding, though he eventually found legitimate investors after developing an actual business plan rather than depending on stolen property sales. 6 months later, Dad pleaded guilty to attempted property fraud and received probation plus court-ordered financial counseling. The experience taught him to verify ownership before making assumptions about family assets. Morrison Environmental Solutions continued operating from my guest house headquarters, where we developed water treatment systems that actually cleaned industrial pollution rather than just moving family money around. The local real estate community learned about the case through industry warnings about due diligence requirements. Barbara Chen's name became a cautionary tale about the importance of verifying ownership claims rather than trusting confident clients. Dad never again planned family financial arrangements without consulting the actual property owners. He also learned to ask about my work achievements rather than assuming them, discovering that his underachieving daughter was actually the most successful entrepreneur in the family. The guest house at 1247 Oakwood Lane remained exactly what it had been for 3 years. My home, my office, and the proof that assumptions about success can be expensive when they lead to attempted theft.